Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about for loops. Loops are super important in programming, and the first one we're going to talk about is the for loop. And yeah, so without further ado, let's begin. So let's do some quick review on what we did on Monday, which was lists. So what a for loop does is it will take a list and it will do something to the list for the most part. That's what a for loop usually does. So let's first go over what a list is. So similar to a variable, a list is created by typing the name of the list. So same naming rules apply to lists as variables. So we can name it, for example, list one, but we can't name it one list because again, the first character cannot be a number. So we'll name it that. And how to create a list is you have square brackets like so. And then you can put anything inside, separating each element with a comma. So in this list, we will do numbers. So let's do like 1, 10, 20, 30, 40. Or let's take out let's see 10, 20, 30, 40. Okay, so this is gonna be our list. So it has 4 elements. And remember, for the index, the first element in the list has an index 0. So the index is basically just what position it is in the list. Again, the first element has index 0. So let me just write it below it so you can see it. So the first element is actually 0. The second element has index 1. The third element actually has index 2. And then the fourth element has index 3. So it's all one off because it starts off at 0 instead of 1. This is the same for most other programming languages. The first element in the list has an index of 0 for some reason. So this is not something that is unique to Python. So other languages also have this. So this is something that you will need to remember. If you do take a programming class at school, you might be introduced to the idea of pseudocode. Pseudocode is basically just words that establish what the program will do. So it's not in a specific language, but just heads up, if you are going to take a programming language class at school, in pseudocode, the first element has index 1. But for most programming languages, in a list, the first element has an index 0. So just remember that. Okay, anyways, now, how do we do a for loop? So a for loop, again, will loop through a list. So let me explain how that works. So first of all, to start a for loop, you'll type in the words for, and then it'll change color. This is a for loop. And then depending on what you want to do, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to loop through the list and then print out each element in the list. So what happens is you have for, and then you're basically create a new variable. So you can name it anything. I will name it element for now. So by the way, element is what you call something in a list. So in this case, 10 is the first element in this list. So that's just some vocabulary. Again, you can name this anything. It's just a variable name. I'm calling it element because it's nice to name it that. But anyways, for element and then in. So basically, if you want to read this in English, it's for each element in, and then we're going to call it a list. So in this case, we'll do list 1. So basically what we're doing is for each element in list 1, again, list 1 is this list right here. And then similar to an if statement, we need a colon, drop down, and then we can do something, for example, we'll do print element. So what this will do is for each element, so for each item in this list, we're going to print that element out. In this case, you could change this to anything like item, for example. You just need to change this to item as well. So again, this is basically just creating a new variable. In this case, this variable will be the element that you are looping through at the moment. So again, for each element in the list, in this case, the list that we gave it is this 4-element list. So for each item in this list, we're going to print that item out. So if we press run, 10, 20, 30, 40. So it's going to loop through this entire list, and for each one, so the first time it goes through the loop, it's going to print out 10. Second time, it's going to print out 20, then 30, then 40. So this is what a for loop does, is it's going to loop through this list, and it's going to do whatever is under this for loop. Yeah, so that's what a for loop does. To build on this, we could also get an index. So if you're doing it this way, you don't actually have the index for the element that you're currently looping on. So to create an index, you can either create a separate variable, or you can use this built-in method, which is for, I guess we'll call it index. For index, item in, and then if you want to have index, you also have to do enumerate. So again, this is only if you want the index. In this case, if we wanted to print out everything inside the list, we didn't actually need the index. But if you did want the index, like if you want to print out the index as well, then you can do for index, comma, item in enumerate, you need this, and then in parentheses, the name of your list. So in this case, the name of our list is still list 1. And again, you can name this anything you want. In this case, I'm naming it index and item, but you can name it anything you want as long as you remember what you named it. So the first one is the index. The second one is the item. So the literal item that you're looping through inside the element inside the list. So this is quickly line until we haven't used index. So we're going to print the item out, and this will also print the index out. There we go. So let me clear the output, run. You'll see now we printed out the item accompanied by its index. So in this case, again, the first element in the list actually has an index of 0, and then so on. Right? So the first element is index 0, second element, index 1. Something to keep in mind. So now that we have that, this is how we do a for loop. So for index, so you can name this anything. You can name it I, for example. You just need to change it for everything else. So the first thing is the index, and then you have a comma, and then the second one will be the item, and if you want to do something to the item inside the list. And then again, you need your colon, and then under, after an indentation, which is automatic, if you just drop down, there's going to be an automatic indentation. But then there's an indentation, and then everything inside, you'll see there's a line here as well. But anything else inside is the body, and it will run for each item in the list. So another thing we can do is, for example, add up all the numbers in here. So what we can do, like a little small project, is we can make another variable like total, and we can set it to 0 for now. And for each item, and actually we don't even need the index in the list. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the element that we're currently on, and then we're going to add it to total. And then at the end, afterwards, we will end up with total equaling all of the numbers inside list 1 added together. So what we will do is we will do total equals total plus item. And then outside, we'll print total. So now let's just run through the code in our mind to see what happens. So you first create a list with the numbers 10, 20, 30, and 40. And then we're going to create a variable, an integer variable, with the value 0. So it's going to start off at 0. For every item in the list, so for every number in our list of 4 numbers, we're going to take what total is at the moment, and then we're going to add total. Total is going to become what total used to be plus the number that we're currently on. So what that basically means is if total is 0 and item currently is 10, then what's going to happen is total is now going to equal what total used to be, which was 0, plus 10. And it's going to loop through again and again. Total is going to update. So at the end, history run 100, because that's 10 plus 20 plus 30 plus 40. So that's what a for loop does. And also notice that I put the print statement outside of the for loop. You can see this because it's on the same line as the for loop. You see there's an indentation right here. There's like a space. Okay, so this basically just means it's inside this for loop. Whatever is here, so if we had more code down here, more code down here, that's all indented. It's all going to get looped more and more and more. Keep that in mind. And if you break out of that loop, the indentation, you delete the indentation, it's no longer going to be in that for loop. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And next up, we are going to talk about repetition. So a for loop can also be used to repeat something. So if you've done block code, you might have seen something like repeat 5 times or something like that. So in some languages, they don't have a block of code that says repeat blank amount of times. So in Python, if you want to repeat something blank many times, you can use a for loop. And instead of in a list, what you do is you call in range. And then in parentheses, you still need your colon drop down. And then in range, you just put how many times you want it to repeat. So this is the super simple way of repeating something a blank amount of times. So for example, if we want to print hello 10 times, and we're also going to, I guess, item, print hello and then something, I guess, then instead of printing, literally copy pasting the print statement hello 10 times, we can just run this. So create a console, run. You'll see that hello is printed 10 times accompanied by the index. So this is actually the index. Again, it doesn't actually matter what you name it. I didn't change it from the last time, but hello range. So again, this number in here tells us how many times it's going to repeat. So in this case, it repeats 10 times. It says 9 because it starts at 0. So if you counted, there are 10 hellos right here. So super simple. Actually, I should probably change this. So you know it's supposed to be. All right, so for index in range, and then again, this is how many times you're going to repeat, followed by a colon, the same thing as an if statement. Every for loop also has to have a colon, and then drop down, print something. We can also do something else, like print by, just to see how that works. Run, you'll see that this entire code, this block of code, hello, bye, hello, bye, hello, bye, is repeated 10 times. So anything inside your for loop is going to be repeated. So it's not a single line of code. And again, this number here tells you how many times it's going to be repeated. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is for a for loop. Now we're actually going to quickly do a version of the homework. So on the homework, there are 2 programs that you need to write. The first one is given a list, which you'll actually create a list like so. It's not going to be an input. You're going to create a list on the top, and then what's going to happen is you're going to use a for loop, and then you're going to output print statement at the end. I believe it's a smallest or biggest value. I can't remember that, so I'll pull it up. But that's the homework. Is you're going to given a list, you're going to output the smallest or biggest number, yeah, for using a for loop. So let me just pull that up so we can do a demonstration. Awesome. Okay. All right, you're going to find the smallest number in a list. So let's do the biggest number together in class. So there are bullet points. All you need to do is follow the bullet points. So the first bullet point says, create a list of numbers, and we need 5 minimum. So I'll do list 1 equals, and we need to use square brackets. So minimum 5 integers. What that basically means is you can put any numbers inside as long as you have 5 or more. So we'll do, let's see, 3, 14, 56, 0, 5. Okay, so our program will find the biggest number out of all of this. So what we need to do is, the idea is we will create a variable called counter or something. In this case, temp. Yeah, temp. Okay. So we need to create a variable called temp. And what's going to happen is we're going to loop through every item in the list. And then if temp is smaller than any element in the list, it becomes a new temp. And at the end, temp should be the biggest number. And then all we need to do is print out temp. Okay, so now let's create our temp variable. Temp equals, and then the bullet point says it's equal to the first element in the numbers list. Yeah, it's just make sure you can put any number inside your list because there might be errors. So again, get the first element inside list 1. It's list 1, and then in square brackets, you put a 0. So now temp will be whatever the first number is. So in this case, it'll be 3. And then create a variable called pos equal to 0. So in this case, it's supposed to be the index, so where it is. Okay, and now we're going to create a loop. And then the bullet point in the parentheses says enumerate. So we're going to need index, and we're also going to need element and also enumerate. So we'll do index, item, in, then enumerate, and then the name of the list. So list 1. We're going to loop through the list 1. That's our list. We're going to loop through it. And then drop down indent automatically. And what's going to happen next, it says if the element that is currently being checked is smaller than the temp variable, it becomes a new temp variable, and the pos variable now equals whatever the index is. That's kind of long. So what that basically means is if the current item that we're looking for is bigger than temp, so if the new number, the number that we're currently looping through inside the list, is bigger than what temp is, a colon because it's an if statement, then temp now equals item. So what this basically does is if item is bigger than temp, temp is now equal to whatever the item was. In this case, item is the element that's being looped. That's the variable that we created. And also, we need to set pos equal to the index. So again, the index is I. So if we're going to use enumerate in a for loop, the first one is the index, comma, and then the second one is the element that you're looping through. Awesome. Okay. And afterwards, print the final temp variable and print the final pos variable. So that's outside of the for loop. And temp. And okay, so now let's just run through the code inside of our heads to see what happens. So we have a list of 5 integers. The first variable, temp, is going to be the first element, index 0 of list 1. So now temp is going to equal 3. That's basically what we did. And then pos equals 0, 0th index, because it's pos is supposed to be the index. We're going to loop through list 1. I is our index variable, and then item is the element. And then every time we loop through, we're going to see, is item bigger than temp? So is 3 bigger than temp? Temp is also 3. If so, temp becomes the new item. Item becomes the new temp, and then position pos equals whatever index we're on. So loop through 3. This if statement is false because 3 is equal to 3. So this all gets skipped. So run the second time. Now item is 14 on our second run through. Item is still 3 because last time. Is 14 bigger than 3? Yes. So now temp is 14. Pos equals 1 because it's the first index. It's index 1. And the first element is index 0. So now pos equals 1. Item equals 14. And then we loop down to 56. So now we're looping through. And now item equals 56. Item equals 14. Wait, no. item equals 56, temp is 14. It's going to be true. Temp, which used to be 14, now is 56. This is a bigger number. And then pos equals whatever index was at. So in this case, it's 2 because it's a third element. So index is 2. And then run again, 0. Item is 0. Temp is 56. Wait, the biggest number up till now. Is this true? No, 0 is not bigger than 56. So this entire thing will not run. Same thing with 5, it will not run. So if everything goes well, temp should stay the biggest number, and temp only gets overwritten if it's not the biggest number. And so in the end, we should expect temp to be 56. Pos, which is the index, is supposed to be 2. Because again, it's the second index. So index 2 in this list. It's the third element, but again, it's index 2 because indices start at 0. Press run. 56, 2. And temp is 56. It's the biggest number in the list. And then 2 is the index. We said pos is supposed to be the index. Pos equals I. And again, the first variable we can create in the for loop before the comma is the index. So index 2. So in the list, it's the one at index 2. Awesome. Okay, so that's how a for loop works. And we won't really talk about a program that loops something 50 times because there really isn't anything hard about that. But anyways, this is what we need to do. This is all there is to a for loop, and there's only really one minor change that you need for the homework for the first part. It's pretty self-explanatory. Actually, one more thing though before you leave is the reason why we had to create temp and pos up here and we can't just create it here is a problem called scope. So what scope basically means is a variable you create inside a for loop will not necessarily be available outside of that for loop. So if we created temp and pos here, so delete this, you'll see that there's an error because we create temp and pos here as variables. This is how you create variables in Python. But the problem is those are local variables. Those are variables that you can only access inside the for loop. So once you're outside of the for loop, those variables basically just get deleted. So in this case, this print statement is outside of the for loop. It's on the same row, right? It's not indented. So temp and pos are no longer available because again, temp and pos were created inside of the for loop, so they're not available anymore. If we created it outside, if we created it outside and let's pop this arrow. And if we create it outside, then we already have those variables. We change them inside the for loop, and then we print them out as they were after they've been changed. So that's a scope issue, not something you really need to worry about. If you do run into that issue, just make sure your variable is outside of that for loop. You can access any global variables inside of a for loop, but you can't create a variable inside a for loop and expect to be able to use it outside of the for loop. But anyways, this is the general structure of the first assignment. Again, there's only one minor change. Just read the bullet points, and yeah, it should be pretty self-explanatory. Right. Anyways, yeah, that's all I have for you today. Hope you enjoy these small projects, and I will see you on Friday because tomorrow is July 4th. Bye.
Bye.